The clock on the wall of the stiff, frigid room read 8:47 a.m., but Ilara had been awake for hours, tracing the floral pattern on the wallpaper that had once represented everything she despised, and now represented the only corner of Willow Creek Manor that hadn't been systematically stripped of her identity. She listened to the echoing sound of laughter from the master suite, a laugh that was brittle, high-pitched, and undeniably belonged to Serafina. A moment later, a faint but distinct clink drifted down the hallway, the sound of glass meeting glass, followed by the murmur of her son Rhys. They were preparing for their celebratory Sunday brunch, oblivious that every sip of their luxury wine, every note of their shallow merriment, was being counted. Ilara reached under the thin guest room mattress, her fingers finding the crisp manila envelope hidden beside her mother's ancient, broken-spined Bible. The silence in her small room was a deliberate act of war. The only key they thought she possessed was the one to this dreary cage, but in her hand, she held the documented coordinates for their judgment day. She lifted the small china teacup she'd salvaged, taking a slow sip of cooling Earl Grey, and smiled. A cold, sharp smile that knew exactly what was coming down the hallway at 10:30 a.m., dressed in a sharp suit and carrying a badge. For 60 years, Ilara had perfected the art of giving way. She had ceded space in her own life like one might pay a tithe, believing that the diminishing of herself led to the growth of her only child Rhys. She gave up room in her narrow hall closet so he could have more uniforms for school. She sacrificed chunks of her meager savings so he could afford his first decent automobile for university. Even within her marriage, her time and her health, she had always made sure Rhys was the priority, the core, the unquestioned beneficiary of her endurance. This house, Willow Creek Manor, a sprawling 3-bedroom, 2-bath structure with a generous yard, was the tangible result of those endless sacrifices. She hadn't just paid for it. She had built its very foundations with her sweat and prayers. So, when Rhys and his new bride Serafina needed a temporary place to stay immediately following their wedding, just a few weeks, Rhys had promised, Ilara hadn't hesitated. Of course they could move in. The house was plenty large. Ilara envisioned shared meals, quiet evenings, and the gentle re-establishment of family rhythms. She imagined staying in her comfortable master suite, the one she had shared with Rhys's father for 3 decades, while the newlyweds took the designated guest room. But Serafina, Ilara quickly learned, had different blueprints for their arrangement. From the moment Serafina crossed the threshold, wearing large, dark sunglasses indoors, she behaved as if Ilara were a caretaker or a tenant in a rental property. She never referred to Ilara by the affectionate title Rhys had always used. She simply called her Ilara, clipped and dismissive. That first evening the complaints began. Over dinner, Serafina pushed her food around and sighed dramatically. "The mattress in the guest room is simply too stiff," she declared, pouting like a teenager. "It's making my back ache." Rhys, catching Ilara's eye across the worn cherrywood table, the table Ilara had bought with her very first tax refund, immediately picked up the cue. "Ma," he started, his voice soft but edged with insistence, "what if Serafina and I use the master for now? You're smaller anyway, you don't need all that space." Ilara blinked, the words catching in her throat. "Rhys, your father and I slept in that room for 30 years. Rhys rubbed Serafina's shoulder consolingly. "I know, Ma, but Serafina's got her back." "She's 38 years old," Ilara replied, trying to keep the tremor out of her voice. "Her back will be perfectly fine." Despite the protest, Ilara retired to the master bedroom that night, determined to hold her ground. It was still her room, her bed, filled with 30 years of irreplaceable memories. The next day, Ilara went to the neighborhood market, perhaps lingering a little longer than usual, hoping the time away would ease the tension. When she returned, the house was silent, but a deep, sickening pit formed in her stomach as she walked down the upstairs hall. Her things, all her clothes, her personal effects, her life, were neatly packed into cardboard boxes and stacked outside the master door. The door itself was shut and locked. She stood there, staring at the boxes piled on the hallway rug, feeling the chill of being locked out of her own existence. Rhys emerged from the kitchen, radiating manufactured cheerfulness. "Oh yeah, we moved some stuff," he announced, as if discussing rearranging a few magazines. "We figured it'd be easier this way. Now you can use the guest room without asking. Come on, don't make this a big thing." Behind him materialized Serafina. She was wearing Alara's favorite satin robe, a deep indigo color her late husband had bought her, as if she had earned it. She had hair rollers nestled in her hair and was sipping from a mug that bore the single, arrogant word, Queen. Serafina offered Alara a smirk that felt colder than the January wind outside. That night, Alara slept in the guest room. The stiff mattress dug into her weary knees, which ached relentlessly. The room was drafty, only one electrical outlet worked, and the closet door was broken. She didn't utter a word of complaint. She had been raised to believe that mothers must endure, but as she stared up at the cracked plaster, she knew her limits were being stretched thin. The acts of erasure intensified. Serafina began hosting loud brunches, complete with raucous laughter, pointedly excluding Alara. Through the thin wall, Alara heard them giggling about some old people who don't know when to step back. Later, Alara discovered her cherished wedding portrait, the one where she and her husband looked so young and hopeful, face down in the hall closet. Her husband's army medals were tossed carelessly into a dusty shoebox beneath cans of old paint. Her photo albums, chronicles of a life built brick by brick, were shoved aside to make room for Serafina's specialized skincare fridge. Reese, meanwhile, perfected the art of avoiding Alara's gaze. She once overheard him whispering to Serafina, "Don't worry, she's quiet. She'll adjust." Adjust. Alara thought bitterly. This was my house. She thought of the winter of '89 when the roof leaked and she was up there with duct tape. She remembered picking up a second job at the school cafeteria when the bank threatened foreclosure just so Reese could have braces. And now, her son was shuffling her aside like old furniture. The final indignity came when they installed a new keypad lock on the master bedroom door, replacing the simple turn knob. "Reese, I need the code," Alara requested, her voice carefully neutral. "It's just for privacy, Ma," he replied dismissively. "You know, boundaries." Boundaries. In her own house. He reassured her. "It's still your house, Ma. We're just building a future here." "And I was just the past," she concluded. Every shrug, every closed door, every sigh screamed that fact at her. That weekend, Alara attempted a final act of domestic normalcy. She decided to make Sunday dinner. Fried chicken, collard greens, cornbread, all of Reese's childhood favorites. Halfway through the preparation, Serafina swept into the kitchen. "Oh, we're doing takeout tonight," she announced, waving a delicate hand. "My stomach's too sensitive for all that grease." Reese nodded along readily. They ordered expensive sushi and ate it in the master bedroom, behind the locked keypad door. Alara ate her traditional comfort food alone at the dining table. There was no thank you, no shared blessing, just the crushing silence. This silence was a catalyst. It made her remember things, important things. Whose name, for example, was still solely on the deed? Which drawer in the guest room dresser still held the business card for attorney Vivian Chase, her lawyer since 2005? And the most crucial fact of all, she might be old, but she was definitely not done. They believed her quietness signified defeat. They thought her exhaustion meant weakness. They assumed calling her Ma, while systematically pushing her into the guest room, was enough to keep her from reclaiming what was hers. But guests, Alara knew, always leave. She stopped cooking immediately. Reese didn't notice, but Serafina did. She made a snide comment about retirement finally kicking in, laughing openly as if Alara weren't standing nearby. Alara let her laugh. She wasn't resting, she was watching. The house filled with noise. Serafina constantly invited her sisters over, their friends crashing on the living room sofa. Alara started finding traces of their chaos everywhere. False eyelashes in her sink, nail glue sticky on the kitchen table, a spill of foundation marring the arm of her late husband's beloved recliner. She asked Serafina to be careful. "If it bothers you, maybe don't sit there," Serafina replied, her voice saccharine. That chair was where Reese's father had read him bedtime stories, where Ilara had held Reese during his childhood asthma attacks. She cleaned the stain with a wet cloth that night, watching it remain stubbornly embedded in the fabric. She never tried again. The deeper pain wasn't the mess. It was the chilling, efficient way they were erasing her history without ever raising their voices. Serafina transformed the dining room, the centerpiece of Ilara's shared family life, into a content corner for her social media channel, complete with a blinding ring light and a white backdrop. Ilara's grandmother's precious lace doilies were stuffed into a box, deemed unworthy. "Vintage doesn't get clicks," Serafina had declared. One afternoon, Ilara returned from the pharmacy to find all her valuable family china, pieces collected over decades, boxed up and labeled donation. She stared stunned. Serafina floated in, wearing one of Ilara's scarves and holding a half-empty glass of wine. "You like it?" Serafina asked, lifting the silk. "It gives me that grown woman vibe." Ilara said nothing. She picked up one of the china boxes and carried it back to her cold room, the guest room with the broken heater, the single dresser, and the missing closet rod. She sat on the edge of the stiff bed and stared at the hideous floral wallpaper she'd always hated. Now, it was the only thing in Willow Creek Manor that still felt exclusively her own. That night, Ilara's knees were terribly swollen and aching. She needed the large, deep tub in the master bathroom. The guest bath only had a slippery stand-up shower. She walked to the master door and knocked gently. Serafina opened it halfway, clutching her robe closed. "Is there an emergency?" she asked, annoyance clear in her voice. "I need to soak my knees. They are swelling badly," Ilara explained. Reese appeared behind Serafina. "Ma, we talked about this. That bathroom's our space now. Just use the other one." "The tub doesn't work, Reese. I've told you that twice." Serafina shrugged, leaning against the doorframe. "Maybe you can get someone to fix it. We're on a budget." Ilara looked at her son, her only child. He couldn't meet her eyes. They closed the door. Ilara stood there, not knocking again, not begging. Just standing, feeling like an unburied ghost. The very next day, she went to the public library and called attorney Vivian Chase. Vivian didn't waste time on platitudes. She listened, took concise notes, and confirmed she would look into recent comparable sales in the Willow Creek Manor neighborhood and start the paperwork for a partition sale. "Move quiet, Vivian," Ilara instructed. "I don't want them tipped off until the papers are signed." "Understood," Vivian confirmed. That was a Tuesday. By Friday, Serafina was walking through the yard in high heels, loudly discussing her grand plans for the property. She wanted to start a large garden, tear up the old swing set, and install a hot tub. She was already mentally spending Ilara's equity. She believed the house was hers. A week later, Vivian called back. She had a buyer. Full cash, no contingencies. The buyer simply wanted clean paperwork and a fast turnover. Ilara told her to proceed immediately. Ilara meticulously photocopied every document: the deed, the sales agreement, the buyer's offer. She slid the manila envelope under the guest room mattress, right next to her mother's worn Bible. She spent the next days in utter silence, watching. Reese had started referring to the master suite as our suite. Serafina posted a social media update with the caption, "Home Sweet Home #married life." They had no clue the foundations beneath their feet were crumbling. Ilara began packing silently. Just the necessities. A few changes of clothing, her late husband's pocket watch, some photo frames, her crochet needles. Serafina saw her packing one morning. "Why are you cleaning?" she asked. "I'm making room," Ilara said, her voice smooth. "Feels like things are shifting." Serafina laughed, pleased. "Good. Because I want to turn that guest room into a nursery." That was the last straw. Not the baby, but the assumption, the unearned confidence that she could build a family life in a home she had tried to steal from the woman who created it. Ilara didn't flinch. The next day, Vivian confirmed the closing date. The end of the month. Ilara had one specific request. "I need you to have the sheriff deliver the notice on a Sunday," Ilara stated. "Are you sure?" Vivian asked, surprised. I want them dressed, Ilara insisted. I want Serafina's lashes on. I want Rhys holding that damn mimosa when it hits. Vivian was silent for a beat. Then, it's done. The morning the papers were signed, Ilara chose to wear white. Not for any spiritual sense of purity, as that was long gone between her and her son, but for the look of profound peace, the kind of stillness that deeply unnerves those who know they have done you wrong. Vivian arrived precisely on time. Her heels clicked sharply across the porch and echoed down the hall, sounding to Ilara like a final solemn judgment day. She carried a folder, a slight smile, and the document that would finally reverse the tide. Ready, Ilara? Vivian asked, sitting across from her at the kitchen table that Serafina had recently prohibited Ilara from touching. Ilara nodded. The sale was finalized. Cash buyer. No inspection delays. Title clean. Ilara was the sole deed holder. Rhys and Serafina had no legal means to stall the proceedings. I want them served mid-morning Sunday, Ilara confirmed. Vivian simply replied, I've already booked the deputy. That night, Ilara slept deeper than she had in months. No creaking doors, no whispers outside her room, no Serafina stomping around in Ilara's stolen slippers. Only silence, the kind that settles in once a decision is final and only execution remains. Saturday passed like a slow-motion countdown. Rhys washed his car outside, rinsing the hood, completely oblivious to the eviction notice already waiting in the official mail. Serafina was filming some trivial nonsense on the porch, talking about manifesting blessings into their lives. The irony was suffocating. Ilara said nothing. She simply watered her beloved roses, ironed her favorite church blouse, and made a small batch of cornbread for herself. Sunday morning arrived. Ilara was sipping tea quietly when she heard the distinct, heavy knock at the front door. Not a guest's tap, but a firm, official stay-issued knock. Vivian and the deputy stood on the porch, both dressed formally. Rhys opened the door, barefoot and in sweatpants. His jaw dropped. Vivian handed him the large envelope. This property has been legally sold, she stated clearly. You have 30 days to vacate. This notice has been filed with the county, and a formal letter will follow. Serafina appeared behind him, still in her robe, hair wrapped, phone in hand. What is this? Rhys opened the papers. His eyes scanned the first few lines, and his face drained of color. Ghost white. You sold the house, he whispered, spinning toward Ilara. Ilara took a slow, deliberate sip of her tea. You can't do this. Rhys snapped, his voice rising. We live here. No, Ilara corrected calmly. You stayed here. This is the home I let you into, and then you locked me out of my own bedroom and called it a favor. Serafina began stammering wildly. You're throwing your own son out. After everything we've done for you. Ilara set her teacup down, placing it softly on the saucer. The sound seemed deafening. You boxed up my life, Serafina. You wore my robe. You turned my master bedroom into your little kingdom and truly believed I'd just die quietly in the guest room. We were building a family here. Serafina cried. Ilara stood up. She stood tall. Then build it somewhere else. The deputy stepped forward, his presence firm. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. After that, it becomes a matter for enforcement. Rhys looked at Ilara, his expression shifting back to that of a small boy who had just realized his mother wasn't going to bail him out this time. I can't believe you would do this. Ilara looked him directly in the eyes. For the first time in her life, she let the full weight of her profound disappointment show. I believed in you, she said. That was my mistake. Rhys and Serafina stood frozen as the first brunch guests started arriving, unsure whether to offer comfort or to flee. Serafina eventually slammed the door shut, Rhys trailing behind her. Ilara and Vivian walked onto the lawn. You okay? Vivian asked. Better than I've been in years, Ilara replied. That afternoon they finalized the deposit at the bank. The check was significant, but Ilara didn't smile at the number. The true smile came when she handed Vivian a folded piece of paper, a listing for a small 2-bedroom condo across town, near the senior center and within walking distance of a park. "You want to buy this in cash?" Vivian asked. Lara nodded. Vivian was already pulling out her phone. "I'll make the call." They closed on the condo within a week. It wasn't large, but it was hers. The paint was fresh, the windows clean, and it offered a small, quiet porch with just enough room for 2 rocking chairs and a lemon tree in a pot. Ilara didn't tell Reese where she moved. He tried calling once, leaving a shaky voicemail that accused her of going too far. Ilara immediately blocked his number. Serafina sent a toxic message on social media, labeling Ilara as ungrateful. Ilara reported it as harassment. The quiet in the haven at Oakhaven was profound. There were no slamming doors, no loud music, no entitled whispers. Then Juniper, Ilara's granddaughter, found her. She showed up at the church one Sunday, carrying her backpack and looking at Ilara with her big, brown, questioning eyes. Juniper hugged her grandmother for 5 solid minutes. "Can I visit?" Juniper asked. "Baby," Ilara said, embracing her tightly. "You can stay as long as you want." That evening they cooked greens together, listening to old jazz on the stereo. Juniper helped Ilara arrange her salvaged photo albums and talked about school. Ilara gave her warm tea. Ilara stood on her new porch, watching the sun set. There was no ring light, no stomping heels, just the profound peace paid for not merely with money, but with restraint and one perfectly timed signature. She had not just sold Willow Creek Manor. She had sold the illusion that Reese and Serafina ever had control over her life. In the old house, the energy had shifted drastically. After the eviction notice, the entitlement crumbled. Serafina stopped blasting music and hosting girls' nights. The house grew quiet, filled instead with a raw, bitter tension. They stopped speaking to Ilara entirely, which suited her just fine. She was already mentally and emotionally gone. Ilara spent her mornings making coffee, reading her Bible, and looking out at her new roses, which were blooming again, strong and resilient, as if they too had something to prove. Serafina paced relentlessly, spending hours on speakerphone, sobbing to her sisters that Ilara was crazy, vindictive, and spiteful. Ilara overheard her crying once, still in the master bedroom, lamenting, "I don't want to go back to renting. I told you we should have pushed her to sign the house over." Pushed me, Ilara thought. That's all I was to them. An obstacle. Reese tried to fight the sale, emailing Vivian and threatening to contest it legally. Vivian's response was brief. "Too late. Legally." Reese didn't try again. He sulked, walking around the house like a restless phantom, finally realizing he was merely a guest in the house he attempted to steal. Ilara felt no remorse. The true turning point came 2 weeks before the deadline. Reese knocked on Ilara's guest room door. Ilara didn't answer right away, allowing him to wait, allowing him to feel the weight of his transgression. When she finally opened it, Reese looked terrible. Eyes bloodshot, hair messy, voice hoarse. "Can we talk?" he pleaded. Ilara stepped into the hallway and closed the door behind her. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," Reese began, his standard excuse. "We just needed some time to figure things out. We thought you'd understand. You locked me in the guest room, Reese." "I didn't lock you," he protested weakly. "You put a keypad on my bedroom door and acted like I should thank you for it," Ilara retorted. He sighed. "Serafina pushed that, not me." Ilara folded her arms. "And you let her. We're losing everything, Ma." "You lost it the moment you forgot who this house belonged to," Ilara said. Reese stared at her as if she were a total stranger. "Goodbye, Reese," Ilara said quietly. "You've got 2 more weeks." She closed the door. The night before the eviction deadline, Ilara cooked one last meal in that kitchen. Sweet potatoes, mac and cheese, fried catfish. She didn't do it for them, but for the house itself, for the memories of the woman she used to be, the one who cooked in silence while dreaming of rest. Serafina didn't come downstairs. Reese passed through and stared at the plate Ilara made for herself. You're really going to eat like that while we pack our lives up? Yes, Ilara confirmed. Because I packed my life up 10 months ago, and you didn't blink. He walked away. The next morning the moving truck arrived. Ilara sat in the backyard, her cup of tea resting on the side table, watching them load their possessions. She did not speak, she did not wave. They left around noon, without a single apology or goodbye. The moment the truck was gone, Ilara walked back inside Willow Creek Manor for the final time. Every room echoed, stripped of the noise, the tension, and the sharp entitlement. She ran her fingers along the hallway, touched the doorframe where she used to measure Reese's height, and touched the corner where her husband's recliner once sat. She walked into the master bedroom, no longer theirs, and stood in the silent emptiness. The house felt clean again. The next day, Ilara met Vivian at the title office. Vivian handed her the final check and a new set of documents. Congratulations, Ilara. You're officially out. Ilara drove to the Haven at Oakhaven with the windows down, listening to old soul music. That evening, Juniper rushed in and hugged her fiercely. I hate them, Juniper whispered. Don't, Ilara instructed gently. Just remember what not to become. They made dinner together, dancing around the small kitchen. Later, Ilara stood at her window. There were no locks she hadn't chosen, no rooms she was forbidden to enter, and no laughter that excluded her. She went to bed in a room that belonged only to her, under a roof paid for by peace, and she slept like a woman who had taken back her name. Peace, she mused, makes no noise. It doesn't stomp like Seraphina's heels or whisper excuses like Reese. It doesn't cry behind a locked door. Peace simply sits with you, a quiet, settled thought. Ilara filled her new home sparingly. Her grandmother's quilt, a few photographs, her Bible, a new tea kettle. She bought fresh sheets and burned lavender oil every night. This was the first place she'd lived where she didn't have to mold herself for someone else's comfort. She walked freely, breathed deeply, and began to heal. Juniper started visiting every weekend. Her spirit, once dimmed by Seraphina's snide remarks and Reese's passive silence, was returning. They started a tiny garden on the balcony, planting mint, cherry tomatoes, and one small rose bush in a clay pot. It's got to be a rose, Juniper insisted. It's your thing. Ilara went back to church and volunteered at the community center, helping organize an estate planning workshop for women over 60. She saw too many faces in that room that mirrored her own, women who had been dismissed and robbed by the very children they raised. They knew what it meant to be silenced with false gratitude, what it meant to be told, "You should be lucky we're even helping." After her talk, one woman hugged Ilara and whispered, "You gave me permission to protect what's mine." Ilara realized she had been told for too long to be humble and to give, but love without respect is just manipulation dressed up in flowers. A month after the sale, Ilara received a letter with no return address. She recognized Reese's slightly shaky handwriting. It was short. "Ma, I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I got caught up trying to prove something and I lost myself. Seraphina and I split. She said something she can't take back. I know I let you down. Miss you." Ilara folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. She didn't cry, nor did she smile. Some wounds no longer bleed, but they still ache in the cold. Soon after, Vivian sent the final sale paperwork and closing balance, along with a brochure for a women's housing fund being launched at the community center. A sticky note read, "You inspired this. Want to help lead it?" Ilara thought of all the women like her. Dismissed, not frail, not bitter, just overlooked. Yes, she wanted to help. She called Vivian and promised to match the first 5 donations with funds from the sale. "Ilara," Vivian laughed softly, "you're building something bigger than a garden now." That Sunday, Ilara and Juniper baked sweet potato pies. One for them, one for the church, and one for the young couple moving into Willow Creek Manor. Ilara walked up to the old porch and knocked. The new wife, pregnant and smiling warmly, answered. "You must be Miss Ilara," the woman said. "The agent said you were the previous owner." Ilara nodded. "Just wanted to say welcome and let you know that house has been through a lot." but it still holds love in its walls. She walked away with a lighter heart, not looking back. The first time Ilara saw Rhys again was nearly 4 months after he moved out. He hadn't called or written further. He simply showed up at the church fish fry. Ilara was at the dessert table, helping Juniper serve peach cobbler. Juniper saw him first. Her face froze and she whispered, "Grandma." Rhys looked older, weighed down by visible burdens. His clothes were neat but wrinkled. His eyes were exhausted. Serafina was nowhere in sight. He stepped forward. "Ma," he said, "can we talk?" Ilara wiped her hands on a napkin and led him toward the edge of the lot, by the old oak tree. Her legs were stiff, but she stood firm and tall. "I've been thinking about everything," Rhys said. "About what I did, what I let her do. I don't even know how to apologize in a way that sounds like enough." "Then don't try," Ilara said. Rhys looked surprised. I was trying to give Serafina the life she wanted. She said you were too stubborn, that we needed control. I thought if I just handled things you'd thank me." "You handled things all right," Ilara said, blinking slowly. "You handled your mother like a piece of furniture." He swallowed hard. "I deserved that." "You deserved worse," Ilara said, her voice still calm. "But I chose silence. Chose peace. You made your choices. I made mine." Rhys looked down. "I lost the house. I lost her. I lost everything." "No," Ilara corrected him gently. "You lost me." She held up her hand before he could respond. "You didn't just hurt me, Rhys. You erased me. You watched me be diminished in the home I paid for. You locked me out of my own room. You stood by while she mocked me. You didn't stand up, and that's all I needed you to do. Stand up." Tears welled in his eyes. "I don't expect you to forgive me." "Good," Ilara said, her voice calm as still water. "Because I'm not there yet." They stood in silence. The sound of the church crowd floated over. Laughter, music, plates clinking, but they were separated by decisions that could not be undone. "I started seeing a counselor," he confessed finally. "It's been helping." Lara nodded. "That's a start." He looked at her with deep shame. "Is there anything I can do to earn it back?" "Not yet," Ilara replied. "Maybe not ever. But I'll tell you this. If you keep showing up in the right places, in the right way, without asking for applause, you might get close." Juniper walked over then, plate in hand. She looked at Ilara, then at Rhys. "You okay, Grandma?" "I'm fine, baby," Ilara smiled. Rhys tried. "Hey, sweetheart." Juniper didn't respond. She just handed Ilara a cup of lemonade and stood close to her grandmother. Rhys understood the message. "I should go," he said. Ilara didn't stop him. As he walked away, she felt a heavy weight lift. Not because he apologized, but because she had already reclaimed what mattered. He could carry the guilt, she had carried enough. That night, Juniper and Ilara sat on the balcony of the Haven at Oakhaven, under the warm glow of thrift store fairy lights they had strung together. The mint was thriving, the cherry tomatoes were growing strong, and the rose bush had 4 new, perfect buds. "Do you think he really means it?" Juniper asked. "I think he regrets it," Ilara said. "And sometimes that's all people have to offer. Will you ever let him back in?" Ilara sipped her tea, looking out at the quiet night. "I let go of the house, the fight, the anger. But my peace," she said, looking at her granddaughter, "that has to be earned." Juniper nodded. Ilara reached into her pocket and pulled out a key, one that opened the door to the condo Juniper now considered her second home. "This is for you," Ilara said. Juniper's eyes widened. "I want you to always have a place that's yours," Ilara stated, handing her the key. "No matter who tells you otherwise." Juniper held the key tightly. It was more than metal. It was the powerful message. You are not disposable. You are not invisible. You will not be pushed into the guest room of your own life. Ilara leaned back in her chair and looked at the stars. For the first time in a very long time, she didn't feel like someone merely trying to survive. She felt like a woman who had already won.